Good evening, everyone. And tonight we continue with our exciting class on Daniel. And we're going to dive into chapter 2. But before we do, I do want to take a second to talk a little bit more about court stories we see court stories in Daniel. Yosef is a classic court story. Esther is a court story. This is like the Jew/Hebrew in the foreign court. Now, we have court stories as a genre internationally. We have there are stories about Lydians, and I wrote this down and now I don't know where I wrote it down. Oh yeah, there are stories, Ionian stories, where Ionians are under the Lydian court and they're giving, or Solon or Thales or Bias are giving advice to Croesus. And then there's under the Persian court, there are Lydian stories where Croesus is giving advice to the Persian kings. And there's this idea of, here you are, you're an ethnic minority, you are or a minority, or at least not the guy on top, but you in your wisdom will explain things to this ruler, right? And you have this, and I think what you have really nicely in a court story, and especially what we see in our court stories, right? In Daniel and Yosef and Esther, is this idea of someone who on the one hand is weak, on the other hand, they're very important because they're in the royal court, right? So this person who our hero is in an, on the one hand, inherently weak position, and on the other hand, an inherently powerful position. And I think it's that combination that makes these stories kind of exciting and also gives it a kind of a special meaning. So Robin already has the statue, the medals of the statue there, so we already know what's coming. And what we're going to see we're going to see some interesting things in today's lesson. Before I dive in, I'm also going to address something that came up in the question and answer period of our last class, which is, when is the Aramaic from? So in this week's class, in fact, let's actually dive in and yes, here we are. So here we are, Daniel chapter 2. So remember in our previous chapter, when we were introduced to Daniel and his buddies, we found out that they have two sets of names, right? Here we are, I'm reading from verse 7, Pasuk Zayin, Vayasem lamsar hasarisim shemot. And the chief of the officers gave them names. Daniel was called Belshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. Okay, now these names have since been interpreted. They're all names that kind of hint at what we call theophoric names, names with a god's name in the title, as it were, and yet they don't actually have the names of the gods. They're hinting at it, some of them. So I'll read to you what I have. Here we are. Okay. According to P.R. Berger, the name Shadrach would correspond to the Assyrian Shaduraku and Babylonian Shuduraku, meaning I am put into much fear. This is a type of shortened name in which the name of the deity is omitted, right? So again, you don't have the actual name of the god. Meshach would be from the Akkadian name Meshaku, meaning I am of little account. And Abednego would actually be of West Semitic origin, which would be servant of the Shining One. That's kind of iffy to say that you'd have a combination of Akkadian and West Semitic names, but it says may possibly involve a wordplay on an Akkadian name that includes name of the Babylonian god Nabu. I don't know if you're saying it's a West Semitic name. He says that such West Semitic names were not unknown in Akkadian. I think it's pushing it a little to say that West Semitic names would be known in Akkadian, but okay. So there are explanations of these names, and the question is, why are we introduced to the names in chapter 1? And the answer is because we're going to be seeing them referred to with their Babylonian names, quote unquote, later in the book. Why? And the answer is, once again, because this book is bringing together different traditions having to do with Daniel and his friends. So it's bringing together, it's bringing in a story in which they're called by these Babylonian names, and we're supposed to know that they're the same guys. So we need in the introduction to the book to be told, hey, these are the same guys. They've got two names, but just know the same guys. We're like, cool. Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to see that play out. Another thing about the so Aramaic, what kind of Aramaic are we talking to here? In this chapter, this is where we switch to Aramaic. Let's see how that works in our story here. Okay, so let's start in chapter 2. Okay, we're starting in beautiful Hebrew, right, where we all feel comfortable. ובשנת 2 למלכות נבוכדנצר חלם נבוכדנצר חלומות ותתפעם רוחו ושנתו נהייתה עליו. So in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar, he dreamed dreams. The second year, it doesn't quite work. Daniel and his friends were supposed to be in training for 3 years. And it's just the second year of his rules. It just doesn't quite work in terms of years. At any rate, Nebuchadnezzar has dreams, his spirit's troubled, he's scared and he can't sleep. So what does he do? He calls all his magicians. He calls all his types of magicians and kind of seers, right? To tell the king his dreams. They came, they stood before the king. The king says, I dreamed a dream. Right? I am very troubled. My breath is kind of quickened to know this dream. And the magicians, I've been mistranslating this. I think I've been mistranslating Kasdim as Babylonians. No, here it is used as a job, right? Which is one of the things that for many points to a later date for this thing, using the word Kasdim to mean someone with a position in the court. And then it says Aramit. And these magicians, seers, this translates to Chaldeans. They spoke to the king in Aramaic, and from here on out, we're going to switch to Aramaic. Malka l'almen chai, right? King, may you live forever. Now, in the Qumran version of Daniel, you don't have this explanation that they spoke to him in Aramaic. You just have a space. In other words, you have Hebrew. He says, I want to know this dream. You got a space, and then it's Aramaic. Okay. Now, while Hartman and Delilah, they did the Anchor Bible version of Daniel, Anchor Bible commentary, I should say. They seem to think that they say that this was a translation into Hebrew. In other words, the entire thing was Aramaic, and someone translated the beginning and the end in Hebrew. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. The beginning, fine, but the end, why just the last piece in Hebrew? But that's what they say. They say, well, he was sick of translating into Hebrew, and this was as good a place as any to say, hey, switching to Aramaic now. Now it's all going to be in Aramaic because they're speaking in Aramaic. I think it just indicates that you're talking about, once again, different stories, different places. So you had this one in Hebrew, whether or not it was originally in Aramaic. In other words, whether or not the first chapter, let's say, was originally in Aramaic and then was translated to Hebrew, I think it had a separate existence before being joined to this chapter here, because that's why it's in Hebrew and this is in Aramaic. Now, as Moshe Matitya pointed out last time, Aramaic would be the lingua franca, and it would be the way what most Jews in this period would talk naturally. So it would feel very natural to them, and it would be the opposite of the way it feels to us, where we're like, oh no, Aramaic, Hebrew was so much easier. For them, it'll be like, yeah, Aramaic, this is a story, this is a story to kind of relax by. So it makes sense for them to have this in Aramaic. Okay, so here we go. So now we're in Aramaic land. What kind of Aramaic? Okay, so if you look at Qumran, simply says it's Imperial Aramaic. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the stages of Aramaic. So when we're talking Imperial Aramaic is essentially 600 BCE to 300 BCE. It can be pretty much anywhere there. It may actually even start earlier than that. Here we are. Here. Yeah, it's like 700 BCE to 300 BCE is considered Imperial Aramaic. Then you have Middle Aramaic, that's 300 BCE to 200 BCE. Okay. Now, Qumran says straight out, this is Imperial Aramaic. There are a lot of arguments about that because this has Persian loanwords. One could have gotten Persian loanwords. If it's Imperial Aramaic, it should be earlier. It's too early to get Persian loanwords. Kuch, there are certain differences in syntax. Kucher says that's because this is Eastern Aramaic as opposed to Western Aramaic. So we have different arguments. Why is this important? It's important for the dating. It's important if we're saying, is this story, does this story predate the Maccabees or not, right? And is this book of a piece in terms of Aramaic, is it all very early? You'll note that Christian apologists in particular really want this to date early because they don't want it to be a reaction to the Maccabees, or they don't want to be a reaction to the Antiochian decrees. Now, it's not. This part, by the way, isn't, okay? This part, by the way, and when we look at the statue, we can date it pretty much to after Alexander is the way it's usually dated. So it's absolutely, it feels right that this, certainly this part of Daniel would be earlier than Antiochus and the Maccabees. But that's really not what we're arguing about. We're arguing about the later Aramaic parts that we'll get to with the, with the horns and everything like that. So, but let's dive back in. I'll pause for questions. Oh, I see there's something in chat. See? Okay, so Moshe asks, are the Babylonian names assigned to them supposed to have some correspondence to their Hebrew names? Similar sound, similar idea, translation, like is common among diaspora Jews in modern times. I think it was so hard for anyone to even figure out what the names meant, right? That they can't connect it. There absolutely is. What I just told you is one guy who says, I think I know what it means, but for a long time, and I'm sure there's still people who argue that it's too corrupted, that these are corrupted versions of names where we don't know what the original is. So maybe they are in fact corrupted versions of something that has a similar name. However, if we have a name like Mordecai, right? What was Mordecai? What was that name supposed to convey? Yeah, I know what you want to say, Matel, right? His name was Matel, so they called him Mordecai, but no. So it's a big question. What, how in the old days, like the really old days, how did they choose these foreign names when they had them? And again, I'll remind you that the Babylonian settlement that we know of in Babylon, actually they kept Hebrew theophoric names, as it were, right? They kept names. That's how we know that. I mean, it's not just, it's also the name of the town. Like the name of where they lived was called like the Jewish, right? It was called, Jewish, right? But also by their names, we can see that they are in fact Jews. So I wonder how, what would make someone choose or have to choose a foreign name, and in what context they would be used. I wonder. I don't know. And I'm sure people have written on this. It's another area for me to read, but like it's a question. What would be the reason to choose a certain name? Particularly now, what was interesting to me when I read these explanations of the names was that these names actually were not like Mordecai. They don't include the name of a foreign god. And it would almost be as if they were choosing specifically names that didn't include the name of a foreign god, right? They were hinting to theophoric names, to foreign theophoric names, but actually weren't full foreign theophoric names. So that was where my mind went when I read these names, but they don't seem to have a whole lot in common with the names that they're coming, that they're starting from.
Miriam?
Yes.
In the case of these particular names, I don't know. I mean, statistically, I don't know how much half really counts, but two of them, the Hebrew name and the Babylonian name, start with the same letter, and one of them almost seems to alliterate Mishael and Meshach.
Yeah, and but then Abednego is always kind of weird. It's like it's like, yeah, like in other words, if it were an easy to think if the rule were sustained, right?
Yeah.
Remember, I just heard a line today. It was great. It was someone. It was like in one of these little like play type, like a kind of a play. And someone says, "Oh, I wish I could be you," and the other person answers, "Well, that makes 1.5 of us." I feel like when you've got an N of 3, so it's hard to kind of like, or Belshazzar, if you add Daniel, it's like. I don't know. It's hard to know,
That's why I was wondering. I was wondering if maybe in that case it's a more of a translation or maybe something like that. I don't know.
Right. So I feel like maybe it could be. In other words, it could be, and it could just be that these are very corrupted, names. And that's frequently what happens when something is transmitted and it includes pieces in a language that the people aren't speaking. Right, so that those things can get corrupted, especially if they're names that aren't being used. Okay, back to our text. Okay, so you say Malka, remember now. I'll remind you. Okay, so the king says, I dreamt a dream, and I want to know the dream. So so his guys say to him, Malka lalminchei amar chel malavdach ufisha nechave. They said, may you live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we'll tell you the meaning. Perfect. Ane malka amar lechastae milta miniazda. Right? Hen la tohodu unani chalma ufishre hadamen titavdun uvatechen neval yitzamun. Right? And he's like, yeah, nope. Right? If you're gonna have to tell me the dream, right? Tell me the dream and its meaning. And if not, I'm going to cut you into pieces and I'm going to turn your houses into trash. Okay. So it's always fun to serve a king like this. But this is life in a dictator, I guess. The hen chelma ufishre, and you see the whole time they're just trying to say, yeah, maybe not. Like this is kind of impossible. The hen chelma ufishre tachavon. Matnan unevizba vikar sagi tegavlun min kadamai. Right? If you tell me the dream and its meaning, you're going to get gifts and rewards and great honor. You're going to get from me. Lehen chamo fishre hachavoni. So tell me the dream and its meaning. Anotinyanot v'amrin, they say a second time. They're like, please just tell us the dream. We'll tell you the meaning. And he's like, Ana Malka, Ama Amra, Min Yatsa, Yatsiv Yadana, the Idana Anton Zivni. He's like, I know you guys are just buying time. Kol Kabel di Chazeton di Azda Mini Milto. I'm telling you that this is what's gonna be though, right? You're buying time is not gonna help. His okay, now it's not super clear what's going on here, but there's a possibility that what's going on is, so I'll translate it, right? You can see the translation though. If you don't tell me the dream, there's going to be one law for all of you, one ruling for all of you, right? And I think you're actually going to lie to me, right? Adi idana ishtane, and it's not clear what he means here. Does he mean you're gonna just try to buy time? You're gonna waiting for me to change my mind, or what he means is, I think you guys are just gonna lie, and I don't know if you're telling the truth. That's why I'm gonna demand that you tell me the dream. In other words, you tell me the dream, and then I'll know that you are actually giving me the right interpretation. In other words, then I'll know you're trustworthy because you told me the dream. So if you knew the dream, then you know the meaning, right? La itai ena beshta di milad malka yuchala chavaya. Right? I mean, did any of you ever have like a boss like this where you're like, but no one can do this? And he says, they say to him, listen, there's no person on earth who can do this, who can tell the king what he wants. Kol kavod di kol melech rav shalit milachid nala she'el lechol chartum bashav v'chastai. No king has ever asked this of any magician or seer or anyone. Umilta di malka she'el yakira, right? And the thing that he's asking is hard. Yakira here, note that it's got the same semantic range as kavod, right? Yakir is kavod, is honor. Kaved is heavy. So it's heavy or hard. And yakira has the same semantic range. It's heavy, hard, honor, right? So here they're saying this is a very hard thing that you're asking. There's no one who can do it. There's no one who can do it for the king, right? It says, except for the gods or the angels who are not dwelling with flesh, right? So they could be saying gods, they could be saying more angels who don't live here on earth. They could tell you the dream, maybe, right? But not human beings. He got really angry. He wants to kill all of the wise people of Babylon. Okay, and so the decree goes out. They're all going to be, and what's interesting is you've got to read it because of the context of the story. You have to read it that they're not getting killed yet, but the way you would normally read it is that they're already getting killed. Like the decree goes out and they're getting killed, but from the context, they're not getting killed yet. They're going to get killed, and among them Daniel and his friends, which is very weird because they weren't involved in this at all, right? This is the first time we're hearing about them being brought in.
Miriam?
Yes.
Do we know that they weren't? Because the way I understood it is that the fact that it says they're going to be killed too implies that they were part of those.
It implies it, but you'll see what Daniel says is like, hey, just give me some time, I'll settle this. Whereas all the other guys were saying, this is impossible, we can't do it. And you would assume from the way the story goes that if Daniel had been in this original command, he would have been like, okay, leave it to me. Because that's what he says now, right? But he wasn't there. He wasn't there, right? Unless you say, there's a little core, and then he got really angry, and he's like, okay, kill all of them, because that's why it's nice to be king, right? But here it's what we see that Daniel has a very different reaction to the rest of what they said, and that's because of Daniel's special status with God, right? That God is on Daniel's side, and he knows God, right? And he knows that God can help. That's the main thing. He knows that the God of the Israelites can help, right? So what happens? Bedayin Daniel hativ eta utem la'aryoch Rav Tabachaya di Malka di nefag l'katal l'chakimei Bavel. And then Daniel, now there's in fact a whole thing that Michael Siegel has written about what this means is hativ eta utem, right? And what he wants to say is that it's from Temu Turu in Akkadian, and what it means is that he's sending a message, and it's not that he's not asking what's going on, and that in fact what in the original story, Daniel was that there are two stories that are being combined here, and in the original story here, he's sending to the king and saying, listen, I can help, right? As opposed to what it looks like here, where he's saying what's going on, right? Because he says to Arioch, the Rav Tabachaya di Malka, right? The captain. We know that Rav Tabachim actually was kind of a title that meant you were very close to the king, and not just like a head cook. Here it's translating it as captain of the king's guard. Sure, why not? that went out, that he who had gone forth to kill all the wise people of Babylon. So here in the next verse, he says, Ana ve'amar la'arioch, and he says to the Arioch, this is why verse 14 is out of place. It says he sent to Arioch, and then in the next verse he says, and he answered and said to Arioch. So what's going on? So what Michael Siegel thinks is that in this original one, that this whole next section was kind of inserted, and what actually was happening here was Daniel was sending to Arioch and saying, I can do it. I can tell you what the dream is. And then we have this whole insert here where Daniel's going to have to ask for time. He's going to have to pray. And that kind of shows you that it's not so simple, and Daniel has to turn to God. It's not like just an instant solution. Okay. And there are other reasons to put in this passage. We'll talk about in just a bit. So he says to Arioch, he says, Alma data mahachzefa min kadamalka. Why is this speedy ruling going out from the king? Edayin milta hoda Arioch Daniel. So Arioch explained it to Daniel. But Daniel al uve'a min malka. So Daniel al means to enter. And it's from ayin lamed lamed is the root in Aramaic. He entered and he requested from the king, he says, give me time and I will tell the king the solution. Now, again, this is weird because he wouldn't give the wise men of Babylon time, right? And Daniel's exactly asking for time. Again, if we say, well, this is an insert that's coming to tell something specific and it's been added to the story here, we can kind of understand a little bit, and we can understand a little bit more. So he says, give me some time. Daniel levaite azal v'lachanani mishal v'azari chavroi milta hoda. So I know I'm saying milta, I'm saying it's milta hoda. Okay, fine. Then Daniel went to his house. He tells Hanan, Mishael, and Azariah what happened, right? V'rachamin limiv'e min kadam ela shmaya. Araza dina dilaya hovdun Daniel v'chavroi im shar chakimei Bavel. That they should ask for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this secret, this raz, which is a kind of a key word in Daniel in general. There's secrets that Daniel is privy to through God. So Daniel and his friends should not be killed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And in fact, Daniel then has a vision. Adayin Daniel bechezva dilelia razagli. Adayin Daniel barach lashmai. And then, so Daniel in a vision, in a night vision, it gets the secret, right? The secret is revealed to him. Okay. Ana Daniel va'amar leheve shmei, and now Daniel thanks God. Ane Daniel va'amar leheve shmei diala mevarach min alma vad alma. Right? May God be blessed. May the name of God be blessed from forever and ever. Di chochmata ugvorta dilehi. That wisdom and strength is his. V'hu mahashne idanaya v'zimnaya mahade malchin umahake malchin. That God changes the seasons and the times. He uproots kings and he establishes kings. Yahev chochmata l'chakimin umanda liyadei bina. And he gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to those who have understanding. Now, why is this important? This is, and according to I'm now doing is I'm quoting Michael Siegel, frankly. Later on, when we get to chapter 7, we're going to have the vision of the horns, where there's a horn representing Antiochus, right? And part of Antiochus, and obviously it doesn't say Antiochus. This is our interpretation that it's actually talking about Antiochus. And Antiochus has this idea that he can change the times, right? That he's all powerful. So here it's already telling us only God can change the times. God establishes and uproots kings. It's God who's above this. So according to Siegel, this has been kind of added to this story to just underline early on in the book. That's what this is proving. It's not just proving that all these secrets are with God and Daniel has access to the secrets through God. It is proving that all of this power is only in God's hands, right? It's that emphasis we already saw in the first chapter that however powerful the king, God is more powerful, right? I'll take a pause because I see there's some things in chat here. What Aramaic accent are you using? Good question. A lousy one. That's the answer. Not a great Aramaic accent.
Well, no, Miriam, seriously, you're reading it sort of like in the yeshiva style, with the middle. Is it the middle there or
I'm
middle?
reading it like in yeshiva style. That's what I'm doing. I just kind
No,
of
but is
slip
that
right
what-
back in.
What do the Aramaic scholars?
Yeah, I know.
What do the Aramaic scholars say today? What would they say? How it's read, or they don't know?
I'm not 100% sure they know. Also, it's a little bit difficult because I imagine that they will pronounce it like modern Hebrew. In other words, I assume the whole penultimate, so the ultimate and the penultimate, I assume all those rules exist in Aramaic as well. It's been a long time since I read Aramaic in an academic classroom. And of course, the problem is, of course, whenever you're in a classroom like that, some of you are coming from Gemara. And so if there, you've got half of the people reading it like I was just reading it, maybe half of the people reading it correctly. So it's hard to kind of to keep it straight. What does Edayin mean? It means then. Yes, Joel.
Yeah, just about Aramaic. I once met this. How do you say Chaldean in English, or how do you pronounce it? Chaldean Catholic. He showed me a prayer book, and it was a Syriac. It was almost identical to Hebrew, one or two variations. But so there are plenty of people in the Middle East who still speak dialects.
There are some people, and in fact, any of you who know Moshe Morgenstern, Matthew Morgenstern, so he did at one point, he did a lot of work with Babylonian demon bowls. Do you guys know what demon bowls are? They're super cool. Okay, so yeah, they would write in Babylonian around the river. It was Jewish scribes would write it. They were probably writing it also for non-Jews. In other words, people would come to them, say, hey, I need to keep these demons out of my house. Give me a demon bowl, right? And they'd write around the edges, right? And then inside the bowl, in the base, and like if you look in the bowl and you look inside the base, there'd usually be like a painting of the demon, right? Of whatever demon that was. And they're kind of funny sometimes. And from the way they would spell, because these scribes were not like academic scribes. These scribes were your local scribe. So they would spell things the way they sounded. Right? So these things sometimes give us a hint of how they were said. What's interesting is, so for example, Satan, right? Satan, right? The way Matthew Morgenstern, Moshe Morgenstern showed me in one place, it was written sin, vav, tet, no, in other words, sotan. The same way you say it in Yiddish, sotan, right? And so it's an interesting window into what we think is the way they pronounce things. It's not necessarily the way they pronounce things in Babylonian Aramaic. But of course, right now we don't really know what kind of, one assumes that we're not pronouncing it like pure Babylonian Aramaic. We're pronouncing it like a biblical Hebrew Aramaic. And I believe I'm probably, in terms of where I'm putting the emphasis, it right now, because I'm slipping into Yeshivish Aramaic, it's probably wrong. It should be like in modern Hebrew. Okay, and Kanala asks, are there two written accounts, one original and another modified and read in that way, and why? I'm not sure what you mean. You don't mean in the pronunciation, right? You mean just like in the story, right? So in the story, this is all a hypothesis. This is all kind of in people's minds saying, well, these things don't work. How can we make it work? There's always a danger when you do that because it's hypothesized. There's no written text that has these two stories separated out. We don't have a written text that's missing this, as far as I know. We don't have a written text that's written, and I'm fairly certain there isn't, that's missing this piece, right, in the story. We do have a written text from Qumran that's missing that, what we call a gloss, an explanatory thing saying, and they answered him in Aramaic, right? That piece is not in Qumran, for example. Right. So that does indicate that someone added it to explain why the switch in Aramaic, why the switch to Aramaic, right? Because they were answering him in Aramaic, right? But probably originally there wasn't that explanation. Okay. Any other questions before I continue? Okay, on to more fun. Okay, sorry about the Aramaic pronunciation, guys. It's hard for me to switch. Okay. All right, so so it's only God who changes the time and the seasons, right? It's God who uproots kings and establishes kings, right? It's God who gives wisdom to the wise. And that's important because, of course, all the wisdom that Daniel is getting is coming from God. And now we go one step further. Who galea mikat, I can't do it in the, who galea mikata umisatrata yadama v'chashocha unhora ime shrei. He reveals the deep things and secret things. He knows what's in the darkness, and light dwells with him. Lach ela avahati mohodei u'mishabach ana di chachmata u'gvurta yahavti. So, God, to you, God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise that you have given me wisdom and strength, and now you have let me know you have let me know about what I asked of you, right? Namely, the matter of the king. The matter of the king, let me know. Okay. Kol kavel dina. Daniel al Arioch, right? So because of this, Daniel was able to go into Arioch. Dimani malka lehovad lechakami Babel. Azal v'chen amar lechakime Babel al tovad ha'el nikad malka ufishul malka chave. He says so. Then he says, okay, Arioch, listen, don't kill the wise men of Babylon. First, bring me to the king, and I will tell him the meaning of his dream. All right. Now, that whole section essentially could be taken out in theory and we could read from Daniel saying to Arioch, send to the king, and then we could read right away the next verse, Edayan Arnoch bet Bala Hanel Daniel Kadamalka, and then Arioch quickly brought Daniel in before the king. V'chen amale di hashkachat gvar min bnei galuta di Yehud di fishra lemalka Yehuda. And he said, oh, I found a man from those who were exiled from Yehud, from Judea, right? Who is going to let the king know the interpretation? Ana Malka v'amar Daniel dishmei Belshazzar, right? So the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name is Belshazzar, he says, Ha'itach kahel lehoda utani chelma dichazet ufishre. He says, are you able to let me know my dream and to tell me the meaning? Ana Daniel kada Malka v'amar. So Daniel answered in front of the king and said, the ana v'amar, we have that in Hebrew also. Ana v'amar together means kind of to pronounce, right? That's what we have, this kind of double verb all over the place here. Raza dimalka she'el la hakimin ashvin khartumin gazrin yachlin lachvayelamak. And he says, look, listen, the secret the king asked, in fact, all those wise people, they are not able to tell you. Baram itai ela bishmaya galei razin, right? But there's a God in heaven who makes secrets known. V'hoda lemalka Nebuchadnezzar madi leheve b'charit yomayim. And he wanted to make known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be at the end of days, right? Remember, I want to say this. We always say the end of days. It doesn't really mean the end of the world, right? It means in the far future, right? It's going to be the final age, right? Right? So this is what the dream that you had when you were resting your head on your bed, this is what it was. Ant Malka, you king, Rayonach amishkavach sliku, ma di leheve acharei dina, v'galei razaya hodach, ma di leheve. Right? Ma di leheve. I'm sorry about my pronunciation, guys. So your thinking on your thoughts on your bed were regarding what's going to happen in the future, right? And so God revealed, in fact, secrets to let you know what's going to happen. V'ana la v'chachma di'itai bi min kol chayaya razadina Galili. But me, not because the secret wasn't revealed to me, the Razadna, this secret was revealed to me, not because of my wisdom that I have more than all other creatures. And it's not clear whether he's saying, I have wisdom more than all other creatures, but that's not why I got this secret, or whether he's being modest and saying, it's not that I'm wiser than everyone else, it's that God gave me the secret. Okay, so it could be, you could read it either way, that in fact, he's saying, I am in fact wiser than everything else, but that's not why I got the secret, or it's not, it's not that I am wiser, right? Lehen al divrat di pishra lemalka Yehodin v'rayoneh lebevach Tinda, right? So God told me the secret so that I could tell you, so that you would know, right? And malka chazeh havaita va'alut slem chad sagi salma dike. Okay, so this is that makes things too much for me. Anyway, you king, you saw a great statue, right? Salma di ken rav v'zivei yatir ka'em lekovlach v'revei dechil. Right? You saw this bright, huge, frightening statue. Okay. Hut Salma. Now note, it's a statue. It doesn't seem to be saying, as opposed to in the next chapter, that this isn't like an idol. Right? It doesn't seem to be, at least. It's a statue that represents in the form of a man, because it's representing men's kingdoms on earth, right? Hutsalma, so just a note here. Now we're passing. Yeah, we don't have that much to work, so it's okay. Okay, I'm just checking that we're all right for time. We're not passing. So we had the whole setup. We had this whole setup saying the king was asking for something that was impossible for man, right? And that's why Daniel, with God's help, could step forward, because secrets belong to God, right? And so Daniel could step forward and save everyone. But now we're getting to the actual vision. Why is this not working? And now my thing is not working. Here we go. Okay. So he says, okay, you saw this great statue. Hud Salma Reshe di Dahavtav Chadohi Udraohi Dichsaf Ma'ohi Viarchate Dinachash. Okay, so you've got this statue. Its head is of good quality gold. Okay, its torso and arms are silver, and its stomach, its stomach and its thighs are of copper. Shakohi di barzel, its calves, as it were, are iron. Raglohi, its feet, min hendi farzel, umin hendi chasaf. So, and its feet, part of them are iron and part of them are clay. Okay, so you have this this kind of reduction in quality as you go down through the body. Okay. Chazeh havaita adi hidgezeret even dilavidain. Okay, and so you saw until a stone was cut out, right? Not by hand; it was just somehow cut. Umichat litzalma al raglohi. Di farsala v'chaspa v'hadeket himon, and it hit the statue on its feet, which were of iron and clay, and it broke into pieces. It's interesting, the sequence here. We'll talk about it in just a second. Bedayin daku kachada parsala chaspa nechasha kaspa v'dahava v'avo k'or min idrei kait unisa himon rucha v'chol atar lahish tekach lahon. So then everything, and it's not surprising because so the feet. What got crushed first were these feet that were these low quality kind of mixed feet. But what that meant was the entire thing came crashing down, right? So and they became like chaff, right? In threshing floors during the summer. In other words, stuff that just is meant to float away. Why chaff? Because no one expects chaff to stick around, right? It's in its nature, it's temporary. It doesn't last. The wind carried away, right? And you couldn't so you couldn't find it anywhere, right? There was nothing, it was not there. And the stone which struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the entire land. So that was the dream. Now I'm going to tell you the meaning. Okay. And we already know, but we'll go for it, right? So Ant Malka, Melech Machaya, you king of kings. Di Ela Shmaya. The God of heaven has given you the power and strength and honor, right? In other words, you are the King of Kings, but all this power and strength and honor has come from God. God has given you dominion over all these people and animals and birds of the heaven. And who? You are the head of gold. Okay. Right? But after you, you're going to have an inferior kingdom, right? That's the silver. And after that, a kingdom of copper that's going to rule over the earth. In other words, you are amazingly powerful, but after you're gone, the next kingdom is going to be a little worse, and after that, the next kingdom is going to be a little worse. Okay. Kol kavel di farsala mahadek v'chashel kola ukefarsala di mara'a kol ilen tadik v'tera. The fourth kingdom is going to be strong like iron. Okay, and so it's going to. What does that mean? It's going to be destructive. Okay, because iron breaks things and crushes them, and that's what it's going to do. V'dicha zayta raglaya v'tzba'ata. Minhen chasafti pachar uminhen parcel mahu pligat tevet. Okay, what about these feet and the toes? Some of which are going to be clay, and some of which are going to be iron. It's going to be a it's going to be mahu pliga. It's going to pligat. It's going to be a split kingdom. Okay. Umin nispitadi farsala leheveva kol kavel dichazaita. Because that's what it means, that the but at the same time, even though it's going to be divided, it will have the strength of iron, and that's what it means that the iron is mixed with the clay. Okay. That's ba'at raglaya minhen parzel uminhen chasaf mingsach malchuta teheve takifa uminat teheve tefira. So because the fact that the toes are made partly of clay and partly of iron, some of them are going to be strong and some of them are going to be fragile. Okay. And then the next point is chazaita v'di chazaitat parsalam arab chasaf. And it's interesting. You say, so he's spending a lot of time on this last generation. And the reason he's spending a lot of time on this last generation is because this is being written in that last generation, right? That's the idea. The idea is that we're talking, the people who are reading this or listening to this, this is the generation they care about. Okay, we'll talk about, so what were the previous generations, right? So what was in general, how is this understood? And we're going to talk in just a bit about how this is understood by, medieval exegetes, by the Parshanim. It's understood to be that gold, let me stop the share for a sec. Gold is the Babylonians, and that's what it's saying. It says to Nebuchadnezzar, your gold. Okay, that was no problem. Oh, and there we can see it in Robin's background there, if you like. Okay, so but he's got the Greeks and the Romans. So the Greeks and the Romans there are not, yes, thank you. Oh, you've got the whole thing right. So the Romans, that would absolutely be, that's in, if you're talking about the medieval exegetes, they will absolutely say the last one is Romans. And if you're Ibn Ezra, you're going to add Ibn Ezra, or Saadia Gaon, you're going to say and the Muslim Empire, right? The age of Islam, that's also part of, because Rome is Christianity. We'll talk. Let's put that on the side. So what we're talking about here in its what we would consider its plain text, its straightforward form. You know, the Babylonian Empire. You have the Medes, then you have the Persians, and then what you get to the iron and the split, that's the Greeks. Okay, so in other words, we have gold Babylonian, so thank you very much, Robin. Gold Babylonian, silver the Medes, copper the Persians, okay? And then when we get to the iron, that's the Greeks, that's Alexander the Great, right? And then after Alexander the Great, it splits, right? We got the Ptolemaic Empire. We have the Seleucids. You say, oh well, there's more than that. Yeah, but the people in Israel and people in this area, they only cared about the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. That's who they cared about, right? So that mix is the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, right? That the Greek Empire broke into, right? Where some of it's strong and some of it's fragile, and what they're hoping is, and now it's all going to be over, right? Then God comes as this rock and crushes them all, and the whole land will be filled with God, right? Okay, that's the expectation, right? That's the expectation from this prophecy. Let's go back and we'll continue reading it through. Here we go. Okay, so here we have, and this is important. V'di chazaita parsala ma'ara b'chasaf tina mitarvin lehevon bizra enasha v'la lehevon dafkin dina im dina hecheti parsala lemitarav chaspa. That's the extra meaning. It's not only it just does the mix of ceramic with iron mean that it's not going to be completely strong. It also doesn't mix. You're going to have different people trying to mix and it doesn't work. Now, this may be a reference to the different nationalities in the empire. In other words, the fact you have all these different nationalities in these empires, they're not going to mix, they're not going to work right together, and that's another reason why it's all going to fall apart. Okay? Because they're different types, they're different things. All right. Uviomehon dimachaya inun yikim ela shmaya mahudi la almin lat chabal umachuta la am acharan latishtabik. So in the days of that kingdom, of those kings rather, the God of heaven is going to establish a kingdom that will never be destroyed. And will never serve another nation. No, it won't be left to another nation, rather. Tadik v'tasif kol ilen machavata v'hi tekum lo'omaya. Right? It will essentially consume all the other. It will break and kind of take over all the other kingdoms, and it will be established forever. It will exist forever. That's why you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands. Right, and then it broke the iron, copper, ceramic, silver, and gold. Right. Ella Rav Hoda L'Malka, Ma'adil Heve Acharei Dina. And so that was God letting you, the king, know what is going to happen in after this, like in the future, right? V'yatziv Chama Umeheman Pishrei. And the dream is true, it's going to come true, and the interpretation is faithful. B'dayin Malka de Nebuchadnezzar nefal al pohi u'ledaniel sigid, right? The sigid, right? The Nebuchadnezzar, the king, fell on his face. He bowed down. That means he bowed down, and he worshipped Daniel. Umincha v'nichochin amar l'nasachale. And he said they should offer an offering, essentially offer incense to him. Anei Malka Daniel v'amar minkshot dilahachon hu elah elahin umarei malchin v'galei razid. So the king pronounced to Daniel, it's true, and your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings, and he reveals secrets. You were able to reveal this secret. Daniel Rabbi Umatnan Raviran Sagian Yahavle. So he gave Daniel, he made Daniel great. He gave him lots of presents. Vahashlate al Komidinat Bavel. He made him ruler over all of Bavel. V'rav Signin al Kol Hakimei Bavel, and he made him head of all the wise men of Bavel. V'Daniel ba'amin Malka umani al avidta di Medinat Bavel. L'Shadrach, Meshach, v'Abednego. V'Daniel bitra Malka. Right, and Daniel asked the king that he could appoint Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right, over also as officers over Babylon. And Daniel was in the gate of the king. That means he was a judge, right? He was a judge, he was a high official, right? It's very reminiscent, or you could say the other way around, of what we say about Mordechai, right? That Mordechai went out before the king, right, with all these things, like there it's more royal dress and everything, but the idea is that he also had honor. He had a great position, and that's kind of the end of this story. So what do we see here in this story? We see this kind of encapsulation of a lot of different themes. We're going to keep on seeing it through Daniel, and I do want you to stick with me for just a minute, because I do want to talk a little bit about how this story becomes central, one of the central stories, not the only one, of course, because there are so many important Daniel visions. But for medieval Jewry, we kind of see how they saw the world, right, in terms of where they lived. So on the one hand, we see this kind of setup. Once again, Daniel is greater than the wise men of Bavel. Why? Because God is on his side, because it doesn't matter who the king is, God is stronger. And it is God who decides who's going to rule. It is God who has access to all the wisdom, and God who has access to all the secrets. And that's why Daniel is able to do what no other wise man of Babylon could do, because in fact, it would be impossible. Who can tell the king his dream? This reminded me a lot of the Midrash on Yosef, right? That how did, this is in Rashi, that's how, everyone knows it, because Rashi brings it. I believe it's a Midrash and not just Rashi. Could be it's just Rashi. Now I don't remember. Maybe it's just Rashi. But the idea that when Yosef tells the meaning of the dreams, right, to the baker and the wine bringer, right, the cupbearer, and he tells them the dreams, and they know, they're like, oh yeah, that's what it meant. And it's like, how do they know how do they know he's right? And the answer is because each one dreamed the interpretation of the other one's dream. So when he said the interpretation, the other one said, oh yeah, that's right, I dreamt that interpretation, that's the correct interpretation. And that's kind of very close to what we have here, where Daniel is required actually to know what the king dreamed. He has to know on his own what was in the king's dream. The same way that Esther, the Midrash on Esther, what Esther had to do to survive in the king's court and keep kosher, is taken from the verses of what Daniel does, right? We have this idea of what Yosef needed to do to correctly interpret, what Yosef kind of did to correctly interpret the dreams of the baker and the cupbearer, is a little bit parallel to what Daniel had to do here when he's interpreting the king's dream. right? And then we have the kingdoms, and the idea again of these kingdoms is this was the prophecy. It brings us up to the current time, pre-Maccabees, right? We're in the Ptolemaic/Seleucid period, and there's a prophecy saying, and this period, that's when God's going to come down and establish his kingdom forever. Now, I do want to point out that in fact, it seems like there were tremendous messianic expectations of the Maccabees, right? There was a real expectation. I know that Al Baumgarten is drawing parallels to the feeling in Israel after the 67 war, that here, that's it, the Messiah has come, right? Now we won a war, a just war against, those who would keep us from having our nation in our land, and now we should be going into the Messianic age. And then there was a certain amount of disappointment now we're going back to in the Maccabees and in the Hasmoneans, who didn't always live up to what people were hoping was going to happen. And in fact, it wasn't the Messianic age. What are you going to do, right? It was a human age, right? They're people, and Hasmoneans kind of at a certain stage certainly they kind of failed from people's perspective, and then what happened was there was this kind of then holdover of the Messianic hopes. They're like, well, that wasn't the Messianic age, but it's got to be coming soon because we saw this, and there has to be this Messianic age. But we see here already before that this expectation. Part of this expectation we actually know, again, if we look at Second Temple works, there was in general an agreement, particularly for Jews in Judea, that to have a foreign ruler over Judea was just basically wrong. In other words, you can't have that. That's not a tolerable situation forever, right? Now you could say that in other in the perspective of some diaspora Jews, this wasn't necessarily the case. And also the question would be, well, what counts as being an independent kingdom, right? Because for Ezra and Nehemiah, having a province, having an autonomous province within the Persian Empire was presented as this is it. This is what we wanted, right? We have our independence. And the question is, well, what's independence? Here, what we're seeing is this idea that no, what really needs to be is that no foreign king is ruling over Judea. And because these are human kings, instead there's going to be a kingdom of God, right? And it's going to just take down all the others. And we're going to see variations on that theme as we go through Daniel. So I did want to say, so if we look at what happens when we get, because of course this prophecy is taken very seriously, right? So then anyone who comes in the following age has to say, all right, but it didn't end after Alexander. We have the Romans. And then for someone who's living like Rashi, right, in France in the Middle Ages, in the early Middle Ages, then you have Christendom. And if you're Ibn Ezra and you're living under Islam for a lot of your life, he died in England actually, but he lived for a lot of his life under kind of Islam. He's like, but then there's Islam, there's the whole Muslim empire, right? What about that? Where is that in this prophecy? And the answer is you just reinterpret the metals, right? And the main thing you're reinterpreting is that final age, right? So you'll have Rashi just talk about kind of Rome, because Rome just kind of slides into Christendom very easily, right? Because Christendom is also Rome essentially, especially from a Western European point of view. Whereas Ibn Ezra is like, but what about Ishmael, right? What about Muslims, right? He's like, no, that's the mix, the split where it's two different, where you've got clay and iron, that is Rome, Christendom, and Islam, right? And the Islamic Empire, as it were, right? So that's what And that's and so does Rav Sadia and says something similar, right? Whereas people in Western Europe are fine just taking it down to Christendom, and they'll say, why is it a mix? And one of the things is because they intermarry. You have different people from different groups, and they're all kind of intermarrying. There are all sorts of explanations that they have, but where they come from determines a lot in terms of how they interpret those metals and the descending elements. And by the way, we see this idea of descending elements in Hesiod and Ovid, 4 ages of mankind: gold, silver, bronze, iron. In Persian thought, you have this idea that the present age is mixed. It's more when you look at the Persian stuff, especially Zoroastrian stuff, the idea of the present age being mixed has a lot to do with the idea that the present age is mixed with good and evil. By the way, there's like this mix of good and evil as opposed to some kind of a kingdom analysis. But we have this idea of this kind of descending metals representing kingdoms. Any questions before I close? Oh, I see there's a chat here. So Moshe, you're saying what's even more reminiscent of Yosef?
You were talking before about it being reminiscent of Mordechai.
Oh yes, you're right. You're right, because Yosef is really put in charge of specific things. As soon as Yosef interprets the dreams, and in fact, many people really use the Yosef cycle as the main way of kind of seeing what does Daniel do with the Yosef cycle, right? Because you have, and in fact, this was interesting. I was looking into Carl van der Toorn, who works on Neo-Assyrian stuff, etc. He says you absolutely have this idea in Neo-Assyrian courts of the king generally turning to his wise men for them to interpret omens, for their advice. He has letters from certain wise men telling the king what that other wise man said was garbage. What that wise man said, that this is what it means. So you have that infighting. You have a lot of things here which you see in different ways in Daniel. But one thing you don't see, they don't have dream interpretation. One where you do have dream interpretation is in Yosef, and you have it in Egypt. Dream interpretation in Egypt by kings was like, in other words, that a king would go in like to a pyramid or whatever and sleep, and to have a prophetic dream, as it were. And then of course that would have to be interpreted. That's a theme you have in Egypt. It's a theme you have in Yosef, and it's a theme you have here. So it seems pretty clear that this idea of dreams in particular is very much reflecting the Yosef cycle.
Yeah. Also, not just the interpretation of the dream, but by the interpreters protesting that the interpretation is not coming from his own wisdom, but from God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And but you don't have, and this is another thing that Siegel says, is that you don't have with Yosef. He goes, okay, he goes and he gives the interpretation. He doesn't have to talk to God first, saying, please send it to me. He says it's from God, but he doesn't have to have a special thing, pray for me, and then God reveals it to him in a vision of the night. So there's another thing that what Michael Siegel says is the original story was even more parallel to Yosef, really one-to-one. Like he's like, okay, I'm going, and he goes before the king, and he right away gives him the interpretation. And then there was this additional version or piece added where he has to ask for help, and he gets the vision, he gets the interpretation in his own night vision. And what Michael Siegel wants to say is that kind of ties it to chapter 7, in terms of Daniel getting a vision, right? And not just interpreting, but he himself getting a vision. And also in terms of establishing that God's the one who sets times, and that God's the one who decides who rules. And that should get us ready for chapter 7, where there's a king who's so hubristic that he thinks he's the one who changes the seasons. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining me. I hope you all come back next week.